It's another great day. I am so happy to be with you today, and I'm glad that you're with us. I have a guest today that I've been looking forward to for a long time, and I've known him a long time, but I'm going to introduce him in just a moment. In the meantime, I'm not at Sarah World right now, mainly because I'm getting a hip upgrade. I asked for bionics so I could jump over buildings. But I just can't walk around. So if you haven't seen me out lecturing, I think I've been out twice this year, and I just couldn't make it on my feet anymore. And it's really interesting to be like that because in my practice, I'm good. In other words, I can walk from chair to chair. When I'm sitting down, I don't hurt. But I'm getting older, 40 years in practice. I'm over 65 now, and I probably wore out my hips being too radical when I was young with my body. But anyway, it's good to be here. Enjoy your hips, though. If they're working, take some walks and really enjoy the walk.
I was asked this question several years ago. How would you practice if you could practice any way you wanted to practice? Number one was I wanted to lessen my dependence on insurance contract fees. I wanted to excel in the clinical areas that I found really fascinating. I wanted that beautiful patient relationship, and I wanted to practice with a work-life balance both in the office and at home. Health Professionals Alliance, Mainstay CSO had this in mind when they started their company. They want that work-life balance for dentists so they can sustain that independence feeling within their practice and build their asset value as they join a plethora of other practices that has this in mind. For those with an entrepreneur spirit, Mainstay CSO will partner with you to acquire multiple practices so you can grow and create that dream business that you always wanted to do. And on the other side of that coin, maybe you have that practice that you want to develop your clinical skills and partner with a company that will help you with the managerial side of that practice so you can really enjoy why you went into dentistry in the first place. Mainstay CSO is there to help you find your niche within dentistry as you build your asset value. So one day, when it comes time to retire, you've made the best choices for you and your family, and you can live the life that you want. If you want to learn more about Mainstay CSO, go ahead and click on the link below, look at their website, and give them a call.
I am so pleased today to have our guest, Sasha dear Avanessian. He's an inspiring person in so many ways. He's the founder and CEO of Harvest Dental. As it's been said in the world around lab technology and his company, Harvest Dental, Harvest is the apple of this industry. Sasha also produces a podcast called Entrepreneur Insights, which is one of my podcasts I listen to in my travels from my homestead back and forth to the airport. And it has so much wisdom and insight. You can find him on Instagram. There's his address. I'll post his address for his Harvest Dental company, which is a lab support company, below, as well as his podcast. Our topic today, cognitive bias, is actually from one of his podcasts that really had a meaning for me. In fact, I've listened to it about 5 times, and it's just inspirational, and it helps me think differently in my life, in the way I look at my business and other things. Sasha, it's so good to see you. Thanks for being here.
James, thank you so much for the invite. It's a pleasure, man. I'm so excited to hang out for a little bit today.
You know, I have all these sticky notes right here, and I'm looking at them because I listened to this podcast on cognitive bias, which I know I have, and I've had to work through that for years. And I know we could talk about a lot of things because you're a wealth of knowledge. But this has been actually a ministry to me. Your words have been a ministry to me because it's more than just my mindset. It also deals with my spiritual side of me. Because for and I'm really open with this conversation. The spiritual side of me is what directs my ethics and morals and my decisions. But this podcast that you did on cognitive bias was very outstanding. So even though we can go in a lot of different places today, it was so meaningful to me. I want to make sure we're sharing this with our audience and how the reflection of our thoughts direct our lives. So why don't you just kind of take us through that and just warm us, give us some oxytocin.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I would say that I'm pretty introspective. I'm a prolific journaler. I believe in journaling. I
Mm-hmm.
believe in kind of reverse engineering my thoughts, right? Why do I arrive at some of the beliefs that I have? How do I, arrive, to some of the decisions that I make? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? As William James famously said, you become what you believe about yourself.
That's right.
And our beliefs shape our thoughts, right? Our thoughts shape our behavior, and our behavior shapes our identity. And so for me, it's essentially a journey through self-awareness. I think
Mm-hmm.
that
Oh, yeah.
self-awareness is I think it's the basis for success, right? I think that the more you understand yourself, the more successful you become. And it has nothing to do with money, but more so self-belief
Mm-hmm.
and joy and peace and happiness and faith and all those good things. And so, you know, um, who we are today is not going to get us to where we want to be tomorrow, because if that wasn't the case, then we'd be there already, right? So
Right. Right.
I'm constantly trying to understand where I'm stuck. And one of the areas where I believe most of us are stuck, including myself, constantly, is in biases, right? Is preconceived notions on what I believe in and why I believe them based on the inputs that I get from the world.
Mm-hmm.
The world fashions and forms us in a way that is subconscious most of the time, and our subconscious mind will always default to what we believe about ourselves.
That is so true. That is so true. Now, on your podcast, you presented 5 biases, I believe, and one of them really dealt with me because a few years ago I went in my practice to fee for service, which means I still accepted insurance. I just didn't have insurance companies contract my fee schedule for me. And the hardest part of that journey was my bias is that I can't do it in this town. Right? And how would you talk to a dentist like that who's struggling with a decision like that could make a huge difference in their career?
Yeah, I mean, I would ask them why. How did you arrive at that conclusion, right? And so I guess I would ask you that question, like, how did you arrive at that conclusion?
Well, within that topic, this is interesting. And I've had this discussion for years because if you look at the temperament of dentists, and I'm one of them, I'm a people pleaser, I'm creative off the charts, and approval is really important to me. And we have abandonment issues, right? If we're losing sleep over a fact that a patient transfers their records, that then we start making decisions from a defensive standpoint of wanting to please everybody. And my bias was wanting to please everybody because I needed approval. And as a result, it interfered with my ability to make good decisions for my career.
Interesting. Wow. Super interesting.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because when you think about cognitive biases, right? They're absolutes in most cases. They're absolutes reflecting non-absolute ideas for the most part, right? Outside of absolute truth. So, biases are, to me, I mean, I defined a bias as essentially kind of a systematic error in my thinking, right? And it's essentially based on how I have, again, processed information or inputs from the world that have kind of influenced my judgments, right? And those judgments impact my decisions.
Oh, so true.
And
Because my colleagues were telling me, well, that's not going to work for you. You could lose it all. See, so I get cognitive biases from my colleagues as well, and so I have I call it like the gremlin sitting on your shoulder, which says no, it's not going to work for you. It's not going to work for you. And these are the biases that that I've had, in a sense of, how about a bias of one's self-worth, which impacts the way we make decisions. Because, I'm married to a therapist, so I get these conversations all the time. So when I heard your podcast, why don't you just kind of go through on the top of your mind, because your podcast was so excellently done on this, but just kind of share with our group the 5 biases that you see entrepreneurs, which most dentists are, that we have to deal with, because I think that's going to every time I listen to your podcast, I hear something I didn't hear before on this topic.
Yeah, I mean, so again, obviously understanding the role of bias in my impediment to growth, right?
Right.
I kind of defined some of the areas that I felt like, that I'm vulnerable in, and then obviously did some research. And so, essentially, there there are 6 cognitive biases, or, mental frameworks, right? That can hold us back as entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurship is, it essentially, tells you you're not good at almost everything that you do.
Mm-hmm.
And I've struggled with that, starting my company, a 2-car garage, and, a lot of the things, I mean, as right, owning a practice, they don't teach you this stuff in school. I mean, they don't teach you how to problem solve. They don't teach you how to read and react. They don't teach you about intuition, right?
Yeah.
And so, biases affect all of these things. And so, obviously the most obvious one, I think the one that we hear the most about, is the confirmation bias, right? And
That's right.
and this is where we will essentially, seek active advice from people that kind of, believe what we already believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so we tend to listen to podcasts that kind of share, our same values
That support that. Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, confirmation bias is you're essentially, you're looking for, information and data that kind of supports what you already believe, your opinions. And what we do, and the vulnerability in that bias, is that we shun or dismiss ideas that don't align.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where we become vulnerable.
And that I like when you said mental framework, and I think that makes a lot more sense to me, because my job as an educator in dentistry, and now I'm getting more into the leadership side of making choices in your career so you can optimize your career and have work-life balance. And I'm a big fan of the family, and I know when you're working better at the office, you're going to be better prepared at home to be who we're designed to be. And when it's all said and done, it's not what we take, it's what we give back. But yet, a lot of our colleagues now, when they're getting out of school, they're high in debt. High in debt can affect your filters big time, because all of a sudden it's easy to compromise your dental soul, because you want to survive. And that's where I see a lot of my colleagues going. So I think when I put myself in that aspect, I had this bias for affirmation, or where I stayed within the boundaries that filled out my current mindset, right? And who changed that for me was Bill Blatchford, because I did a coaching program with him almost 30 years ago now. And that was his thing, is that you're going to, based on your filters, your outcome is pretty much going to be what your biases are. So if you think you're going to fail, which a lot of dentists are great, we practice defensively because we don't want to do anything wrong, which is a good thing. But then we think so much about being defensive about what we do that it takes away our ability to what we do, reasonable, plausible risk factors. Because what you say as an entrepreneur, you have to take risks to climb the ladder, but they're calculated. So that's what I've had to deal with through the years. So if you were giving advice to a dentist right now who wants to grow, and with what you've done within your company, which is, the Apple, which is a pretty high standard of what you've done, how have you overcome the things you had to struggle with, if you don't mind being transparent on that? Because I think transparency helps other people to connect with, yeah, maybe that's how I am inside. What were the biases holding you back as you've done your journey with creating a company that is the pinnacle of the world in what you do?
Well, I listen, it's funny talking about biases. I mean, I don't believe that, right? I mean, that's something that is, that is, again, we tend to, I think, we look at ourselves in the mirror and maybe we don't see what others might say of us. But the truth is that, 95% of the thoughts that we think were the same thoughts that we thought yesterday.
Oh, wow.
And so, again, there's, at Cal Lab in Chicago, I was a keynote, and I spoke about, the title of the message was Culture Over Strategy Every Time. And one of the major pillars of that message was around the breakthrough identity.
Oh, wow.
And it essentially revolves around the fact that, 95% of our thoughts, our subconscious mind is incredibly powerful. And it's like code that runs in our brain.
It's like in here affecting everything, how we respond, right?
It is our automatic, right?
Default.
And that's really where, right, the bias lives. And, the subconscious mind is that part of the mind which we're not fully aware of, yet it is that part that influences most of the decisions that we make. And, and it's like, and again, and I think I said it earlier, but it always defaults to our self-belief. And, this is important to understand because you or I will never grow past the limits of our self-belief.
Wow. That's powerful.
Right?
Because, I mean, when I think about self-belief, being married to a therapist, those factors actually can be transferred from our parents from an organic standpoint. And then we have that environment we have to deal with, which is these two things coming together. And then we venture on. Okay, this is powerful stuff right now. You don't mind if I'm getting too excited, right? Okay. But on your podcast, you talk about train the mind to desired truth. Why don't you go down that path with us a little bit? Because I think now's the time to bring that in.
Absolutely. Well, for me, there's a scripture in the Bible that says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind.
Right. Amen.
And so, like kind of the place that I go, one of the things that I do that has been very, very helpful for me, right, is, wisdom, right, is the key to everything, right? You hear it all the time, and it is what it is. But, so for every day of the week, I read a chapter. Every day I read a chapter of Proverbs. So 31 chapters. And so, and it's, and I learned this from Rob LeJour, actually, who is our EVP of strategy. And
Mm-hmm.
he kind of got me into this. And I'll tell you what, it's just like kind of it washes your perspective, and perspective
Mm-hmm.
is everything. I mean, perspective is how you view the world,
Yeah.
right?
It's our reality.
So there are certain things that I believe are true that may not be absolute truth. These are my beliefs. And then there is truth that I believe is absolute truth, and it's unshakable.
Mm-hmm.
And it informs my emotions, because my emotions are shakable.
Mm-hmm.
And in entrepreneurship, emotions are a huge factor.
Yeah.
Again, one of these things that you don't really learn in business school. You don't learn how to overcome fear. You don't learn how to handle rejection.
Mm-hmm.
You don't learn how to lose, and even how to win. You don't lose. You don't learn about humility when things are going well.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You become prideful when things are going well. And I've
Oh,
had
yeah.
those moments where I've been reminded very, very quickly that actually, I'm not as great as I might think I am.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about, this whole thing of truth, understanding what your unshakable truth is, and that's essentially, that becomes the well that I go to in my darkest moments as an
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneur, and I
Mm-hmm.
still have them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll always have them, because that's
Yeah.
part of it's what we signed up for. It's part of the journey. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but
No, I think that's very powerful, because one thing that you said there that related to my thinking and what I see in this is that our framework and our chemistry of our brain emotionally, like you mentioned, fear can overtake us. Like, we know what happened in the last few years in the world. And when fear happens, I read a book by Dr. McDonald on this. When you have fear, it actually paralyzes cognitive thinking.
mm,
So all of a sudden, people are making decisions totally from their fear factor, which usually is not going to show up where we need to be.
mm,
Like, for instance, I've coached doctors, particularly in California, of where they're wanting to lessen their dependence on insurance, and their greatest fear is they'll fail. Their patients
mm,
will leave. Then they can't support their family. And then they look at it from a financial standpoint. So fear is, to me, cancer in the mind. I mean, we need to use
mm,
fear productively, though, because if there's a fear, like I live out here in the country, right? So when I'm out and about and with my dogs and all that, there's wild animals out there that would like to eat me or my dog, and I have to live within that fear and make good decisions and be prepared for the fear. But I don't want to respond to the fear without preparation. So what I hear you saying in this journey here is, how as an entrepreneur do we continue preparing ourselves for those fear factors, because they show up, so we don't
yeah,
react to the fear, but we recognize it as a trigger to advance to a higher level.
100%, 100%. And growth is actually a transformed relationship with fear,
Like that, I like that.
because
Yeah.
it's always there, right? And confidence has nothing to do with what we're good at, but it has everything to do with the stories that we tell ourselves,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
And you know and the reason is because you know the stories we tell ourselves are actually meant to protect us,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
because we're more motivated by averting pain than we are by progress.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we tell stories that are meant to protect us, right? And it's that 95%, right? It's that subconscious mind that is that's kind of that is working. And so, whether you call it a, a lack of confidence or fear of failure, right? The stories that we tell ourselves are actually, it's all invented. The fear is real. The insecurity is real, but the story that's causing it is something that we've made up. And so, one of the things that I've done in my journal, again, is asking myself kind of this question around the opportunity cost on the stories that I tell myself, right? Based on those stories, have you ever taken the time to question, what have I given up? What have I missed out on? What opportunities have passed me by? I've had to face those questions, right? As part of this, going back to this kind of like truth thing, right? And then, writing, like, in a world where I had unlimited confidence, right? How would I treat myself differently? Right? What attributes would I want to own?
Yeah.
So,
on that topic the other night, my wife and I were talking because in the last 3 years, we made a major move in our life. In other words, we sold everything but the practice in Santa Rosa and moved to Idaho. And we've always had this dream of having our own food because we feel like we're getting to the point where we want to know what's going in our body. So we want to control how that's grown. But we made that move based off of the dynamics of the time we were going through, particularly with economies and all that, knowing that, our property up here, we wanted to buy into that before it went too high. And so we made that move, but yet I knew I was going to have to travel. And my wife and I were talking the other night about, there's that phase in the good book that says, be purified by going through the fire, right? Well, we're very committed. I mean, we've been in since fourth grade. But the fact that we can't be together all the time, fortunately, we have FaceTime, but we both had submitted the fact that we've grown more in our trust of an almighty God, in his providence and how he leads our life, because we had to we had to get through fear to do what we're doing. And by going through that fear, we had nowhere else to turn to the providence of who is guiding my life. And I would say anyone in the audience today, you need to be in a factor where you have a guidance in your life to something that's bigger and higher than what we are. To me, that's God. But as a result, our faith has grown, and because it was the difficulty of the journey and the fear of the journey that gave us the opportunity to exercise that faith. And it wasn't easy. Nothing was easy because, again, my bias over here on his shoulder is fear. It's not going to work. What are you going to do? And I had to get over that and say, no, I believe that we're being led this way, and I just had to do it. And I would say that's something that never goes away, because once we get to one level, maybe conquering this mental framework bias we have, then if we're being guided in our life, something else will show up that may stretch us even more.
Yeah, no, that's so good.
It never ends.
It never ends. And you need fear to have faith, right? Because faith is the absence of it's certainty, but you need the catalyst.
Yes.
To define faith, right? And faith is in the midst of what is maybe the opposite of what you believe is happening, right? And there's an interesting, the word confidence, right? The Latin root word of confidence, right? Are con, right? Which means with, and fido, which means trust, with trust.
Oh, yeah.
And just because we trust does not mean that we are absent right? That we are absent from fear and negative thoughts,
Yeah.
right?
But it makes a difference with what we do with those thoughts. You know, another thing, I'm going to bring up my sticky notes here that I wrote down from your podcast. The neural process, renewing the mind and not being a victim of your thoughts. Why don't you kind of give us a little vignette on how do we renew our minds so we don't go into that victim mode? Because if we can climb above that victim mode, and a lot of it's subconscious, it may be what we're feeling but not thinking, but there's that cloud of feeling that we have that takes us from, like, you know, I grew up, part of my life was in Hawaii, and I had to learn how to surf. Well, before you really started to surf, you had to wipe out a lot. But you just coming back until you got that one wave. How do you create that one wave experience in the brain where you know you can get beyond maybe that thought mental framework that's keeping the journey from being a victim journey? Like,
Sure.
Woe is me.
Right. Yeah. And so woe is me is a feeling,
Right.
right? It's a feeling. And so too often, if we're not really like aware, we become captive to those feelings. Right. And so when we talk about confidence, right? Confidence is not a feeling, but it's an intentional act. Right. You know, when I was, you know, I have an intense fear of public speaking. And so if I waited to feel confident before standing on that stage at Cal Lab, right, I would have never done it. You know what I mean? And so these are ways that you kind of rewrite the brain, right? It's, you know, all you need is a 5% shift to disrupt that 95% subconscious, kind of repetitive cycle, that mental cycle. And so the first time I did it, I mean, I was freaking out, but after 5 times, 8 times, you know, I still get nervous, but it's different. It's a relationship with fear. I'm not being held back by fear. Right. And so, you know, confidence to me and rewriting your brain is actually kind of stepping into those areas of your life that you dream about, those same areas where you told yourself I don't belong.
Yeah. So true. It reminds me of Paul Homley. I'm sure you probably have connected with him somewhere in your past, maybe, but he was my speech coach. And I took classes from him probably over a period of 25 years. And they would push me more than anything else. But he would say, look, when you're, you know, in fact, a lot of people would rather die than do public speaking, right?
Yeah.
That fear.
Man.
And he said, you learn to harness that fear and you make you fly. And harnessing fear to make you fly.
I love that.
And there's another thing I learned. As my wife is a therapist, and there's a long history here because, you know, we lost a child and we went through counseling, and then we started holding these workshops at our church for people that were maybe going through heartaches and things like that. And what we found is that the brain is plastic in this sense of where you can change your thought process by making a choice to change. And that repeated choice of change will eventually start changing the chemistry interface between our neurons. So it actually affects the way we feel, so we don't have that deep cloud that maybe would hold us back from getting forward. And that's a disciplined thought. You know, I've learned that by being around mentors. Like, I look at you. Your podcast is a mentor for me because it appeals to what I've been through in my life. And I can hear through the lines that there's a lot of wisdom there because I know where you're coming from with your mind and how you've recreated your filters to be so successful with a company. And I think that would be the main thrust that that I hope our audience is picking up, because I don't want to end on this podcast. I think we're just barely tipping our toes in the water. And it's good water, by the way.
Yeah, it is great water. It's great water. But, you know, and I think the thing, you know, going back to entrepreneurship is, you know, limiting beliefs are normal, right? And so how, you know, there's this concept called diffusion, right? And if you can kind of, as an example, you know, it's like when you see a quarterback, an NFL quarterback that throws an interception, right? He's
Yeah.
able to diffuse himself from the moment. He doesn't define himself. He doesn't define his game. He knows that he's got, you know, his next, you know, decision is 2 minutes away, and he's got to get back to the sideline, look at the tape, and figure out what happened. He can't keep himself connected to that.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's diffusion. It's the ability to separate yourself from your negative thoughts. Right.
Oh, that's
and
powerful.
and it's about recognizing when we are being unkind to ourselves.
Oh, yes. Yes. That put it all in perspective. Being unkind to oneself.
That's the tool.
That's the tool. You know, it reminds me, because the San Francisco 49ers, they had this new young quarterback, Brock Purdy.
Purdy, yep.
And, you know, he was like Mr. Relevant. So he came in, and he's doing very well. And it's so interesting. I just heard an interview with him, and I'm always intrigued by people that just rise to the occasion. And he said, look, when I knew I didn't do something right, or maybe I could have done better in one game, I'd leave it with that game, but then I move on.
Right.
And I don't let that memory come back and curse my ability to perform in the future. Because that's self-doubt. That's self-doubt. And that's what I hear you saying. And you know, when I think of myself as a dentist and think about how we're educated, right? We don't want to do wrong. We don't want to do anything wrong to our patients. And the education in dental school is not doing wrong and messing up. And so all of a sudden we get into this fear of never wanting to mess up. So we play it safe, right? And there are ways to play everything safe. And I had to deal with that when I went and changed my dependence on insurance, because to me, I wasn't playing it safe with my future. Though, having said, in retrospect, it's the best decision I've ever made, because I can actually serve my patients better. It doesn't mean I'm looking to make all the money off of them, because I give back. Well, I give back in my practice all the time, but I make the choices who we give back to. And my whole aspect of being blessed is in life is you got to run your business so you can pay your team well. You can take the classes you need to take to be the best you can be, so you can pace your daily life and your work-life balance in the office, so when you go home, you're looking forward to going back the next day. And part of that is just by educating yourself and not letting the business run you, but you run the business by getting over your fears and making decisions from a fear-based standpoint. And I think, having been a dentist, I can relate with that, because we're naturally inclined to go that route. A lot of us are. And I'm speaking for myself now, I'm being transparent. But I've had to learn not to let that fear influence my decisions, but I take the fear and it to raise me to a new threshold. And that threshold is taking calculated risk, knowing the fact that I'm going to own it. I'll never be a victim of my environment. I don't have to be. And I accept my decisions and not blame it on someone else. So has every one of my decisions been right in my career? No. But I've been moral and ethical about them. I don't compromise ethics to get ahead, nor do I compromise morality to get ahead. But I'll be willing to challenge my fear that would be holding me back to get ahead. And that's where I found your podcast so meaningful to me, because it kind of like put it all together again. And by the way, I'll list that podcast below so you can go right to that link because you've got to listen. It's 15 minutes, I believe, or something. By the way, I apologize. I said 5. There were actually 6 biases that you talk about in that, and it really made a big difference to me. Well, this has gone by well. I try to keep these around 35 to 45 minutes, so we're kind of getting to the end of that. But why don't you just wrap up a challenge to us, a challenge to me and our audience today on how you've taken this mind process and formulated your mind. Like you mentioned, speaking in front of a group like that. It's the same thing as speaking. What would be your advice in a nutshell based on what we've talked about today of where, if someone's struggling with what decision do I make now? How do you rise above the fear? How do you make the best choice? Because you got to have facts. I believe in looking at facts and looking at data, but there's also intuition. And what I've noticed with some of my mentors who make good decisions, intuition to me is just a result of putting wisdom into cognitive mindsets. And so when you have those two things working together, when you have wisdom working with knowledge, that's when you get intuitions. So how do we keep that alive and get our intuition so we're just making good choices?
Yeah, I mean, I one of the things that I've heard, which is kind of just been real sticky for me, is feed your faith, starve your fear. And
I love that.
And again, fear is always going to be there, right? If there was one kind of challenge, I think for those that are listening, it would be, train yourself to identify the unhelpful stories that you tell yourself. Right?
Yeah.
And you do that by, asking a counter question to yourself, which is this helpful for the person that I want to become? So, that's, I think, where I'll leave it.
I love it. Hear that little music right now? It's our theme song. It says, waste no time. My challenge is just to waste no time. Hey, if you can hang on for a moment, I'm going to close this off and tell our audience goodbye, and hopefully we can have you back. I mean, I would really like to have you back and go a lot different angles. Plus, I want to have you back and talk about your products at Harvest, because that's really where I like to go. So hang on for just a moment.
You got it.
Wow, Sasha, thanks so much today. And I always challenge everybody with our theme song, and that is waste no time. And don't waste time living in your fears. Waste no time being a victim, but move ahead. You got to be uncomfortable to do that. But when being uncomfortable becomes normal, but you actually surge from it, you surge that energy and you just move ahead, believe me, it will work. I've had an incredible career of almost 40 years now in dentistry, and I've had to make some tough decisions in my journey just because I thought maybe I wouldn't make it. But I did, because I had good people around me. And I have people like Sasha who can inspire us. And so find those people in your life who will inspire you, be your mentors, and you'll never look back. So thanks for watching today. I look forward to seeing you real soon in that next podcast. Thank you.